hear me okay?
We have got you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thank you. Really sorry that I'm not there today. I had a problem with my original flight and the so-called rain bomb and was hoping to fly in this morning, perhaps ambitiously, but the flight was late, which meant I was going to miss this talk. And so I really appreciate Sarah and the organisers letting me phone in to talk to you today about threatened species management and the role of private land conservation. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Bundjalung country. I wish I was there in Camajaro lands, where you are, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. So today I'm going to be talking about bush heritage and bush heritage's reserves, which are a form of private land conservation or private protected area. These reserves cover about 1.4 million hectares. We've got about 54 of them around Australia and contain hundreds of threatened species which we manage on our properties. I'm not going to talk about our partnerships, but we also have extensive partnerships around Australia, both with Aboriginal partners and also with agricultural partners as well, and a few other different types of partnerships. But I will say, when combined, all of our reserves and partnership areas equate to about 1.5% of Australia. So it's pretty impressive the influence that bush heritage has on Australia's lands. But I'm going to be talking today about two case studies focusing on our reserves and threatened species. Perhaps one of the more famous ones is Pullen Nature Reserve, or Special Wildlife Reserve in southwestern Queensland. So that dot in the southwest there in Queensland, in 2013, Johnny Young rediscovered the night parrot at that location, and this was the first time that it's been recorded in about 150 years. And so in 2016, Bush Heritage bought this property, recognising the significance of this for the conservation of the night parrot. And then the Queensland government, not long after that, dedicated as the first state's special wildlife reserve. And this gave it similar status to a more formal protected area that private protected areas don't necessarily have in the state of Queensland. And so I'll talk about this a little bit later, but from Pullen Nature Reserve, a lot of the science and work that occurred there enabled some of the tools and detection approaches that then allowed other populations to be discovered over in Western Australia. And so currently we know about 6 populations of night parrot across Australia, and you can see that the sort of significance of the Eastern Pullen Nature Reserve, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about now. So to give you a bit of an idea of how significant Pullen is for the night parrot, Nick Leesyberg and James Watson and others have been doing lots of work there over the last sort of 10 or so years, and they have got pretty strong ideas about how many birds there are, and it's probably about 14 or 15 individual birds on Pullen and in some of the adjacent area around that. And while we don't know what the total population is, their sort of rough guess or estimate is that we're talking about perhaps hundreds of night parrots existing in the wild. We're not talking about thousands of night parrots, given what we know now, and obviously more work is needed, but it really shows the significance of Pullen and its role for the conservation of the species, particularly in the east. And I note that there's a lot of ongoing efforts to try and discover additional populations and individuals in the different regions where they're found. But I wanted to make one other comment about Pullen and the night parrot, and that is that it's really been critical for the research to really understand the night parrot. And James Watson touched on this in his talk. But because Pullen is privately owned and is actually quite accessible, it's really enabled a lot of really important research that's enabled this research to be applied in other places around Australia. And this includes things like detection methods that I mentioned, where Bush Heritage has helped partner with traditional custodians and mining consultancies and things like that to really improve how we can find night parrots in the wild. And that's how we've helped discover some of these additional populations in the West and helped to inform conservation plans as well. And there's also been a lot of really interesting research to understand the movement ecology of the birds as well, understanding what the habitats they're using in terms of where they're roosting and where they're feeding and how far they're travelling to access these resources. And this has been really important to inform the conservation of the night parrot. I just wanted to now move to a second case study, talking about our work in southwestern Western Australia. So many of you would probably realise that this area is what's known as a global biodiversity hotspot. It's got incredible species richness, similar to a sort of rainforest in the tropics, and it's really the plant diversity which is just incredible in this region. But while it's incredibly diverse, it's been really heavily cleared and degraded, and so the existing vegetation is quite fragmented, and there's only a very small fraction of vegetation remaining in this region. And so Bush Heritage works in the sort of southeast between the Stirling Range National Park and the Fitzgerald River National Park. And so if I hone in on this area, it really is a hotspot within a hotspot. This map always blows my mind. If you look at this is about 6,000 hectares, and there's over 1,000 plant species found in this area. If you look on the right, you can actually see the legend of 0 to 10 kilometres to give you some scale of this. And so if we look, for example, in the south at our Eddie Garrett Nature Reserve, it's got about 481 plant species. And if you move a few kilometres to the north to Monjibok, it's got 591 plant species, 100 which are not found to the reserves in the south. And this pattern continues where you can see there's just this incredible turnover of plant species, but in a really quite degraded and fragmented area that sits between that Stirling Range and the Fitzgerald River National Park. And so private land conservation has been really critical in to help to maintain that connectivity and to actually build that connectivity as well through restoration efforts, which I just want to touch on briefly. So Bush Heritage has been buying land in that corridor, and for areas that have been cleared or degraded, putting a lot of effort into restoration in the region and doing things like here in Eddie Garrett, there's about 150 species that are planted as part of the restoration efforts. And this is helping to restore threatened ecological communities like the Kwongan shrublands. But what's really, really interesting is that as the habitat is being restored and that connectivity is being increased, we're seeing a return of several threatened species and species of conservation concern as well. So we're seeing that mallee are recolonising a lot of these patches, and we're also seeing other threatened species come back, like Carnaby's black cockatoo, and even Chuditch is being detected now as well. So not only are we restoring these, very rich ecosystems, but threatened species are coming back because their habitat's coming back and that connectivity is coming back into the landscape. So now, just very briefly, to just a bit of a rant, we're asked to sort of finish with some recommendations and also trying to put this into a global perspective. Well, if you think about it, we're we talk a lot about, the efforts to protect 30% of land and seas by 2030, and I put in brackets in the right places. It's not just an aerial target. But if you look at Australia, private land is around 60% of Australia's land. And so private land is going to be really key in order to achieve that global target. And I hope some of the work that I've mentioned here is a bit of a model of how we can do long-term private land stewardship. And just to end on this, so the graph that you see on the right, this is some work led by James Watson, who's been looking at the growth of the protected area network since 2010. And so you can see over time there's been quite a large increase in protected areas up until 2022. And a lot of this increase is in Indigenous lands, which is awesome, which has been amazing progress. But you'll see that the private land has not changed a lot. Towards the 2010s, there was some increase in that. I think particularly around when there was a lot of funding for the National Reserve System program, but it really hasn't been growing a lot. And another big recommendation that I think we've heard all morning as well is that we really need a lot more funding into our private protected area networks and our private land conservation, because it really is going to be a key piece of the puzzle. And finally, just a last point to end on is, we really need to be thinking about a landscape approach as well, and that conservation efforts really need to be applied across private land and also other tenures, so that we can do things at the landscape scale and not just be working in our little patches. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hedley, and just perfectly timed as well.